So is there really a right way to build a network? Actually, yeah, there really is. And by the time we're done here, you will understand the right way to build a network using a two-tier, also known as a collapsed core architecture. Now, we all know that just about every question can be answered with, it depends. It depends on the factors, the timeline, how much money is involved, et cetera, et cetera. We can always answer things with it depends. But when it comes to building a network the right way, there's actually not that many options that we have. And that's great news for us. So let's meet Mike. See, Mike was just a normal guy out for dinner with his wife, and as he went up front to pay for his dinner, because it was that kind of establishment, there was a little glass jar with toothpicks right there, and it was at that moment that Mike had his epiphany. He thought to himself, these toothpicks would be amazing if they were covered in chocolate. Why has nobody done this yet? Why are there no chocolate-covered toothpicks? And so he went home that night with his wife and talked it through, and she thought it was a great idea too, and that's when Mike became the toothpick entrepreneur. So he doesn't go out and purchase $100,000 in network equipment and build this giant architecture. Spoiler alert, that's what we're going to be talking about. No, he's just making toothpicks. He just goes to his house and he's got that little switch sitting in the closet, and he ran some cables to the various places in his home because he took the CBT Nuggets IT Expert Cabling Series, which is amazing, and he set up IP phones in his house so his wife could call room to room with him because Mike is Jeremy, really. So they're in their house doing their thing, you know. Mike does the architecture of toothpicks being dipped in chocolate. His wife does all the accounting and the books and trying to land deals, and all of a sudden Mike finds out he's successful. He lands his first little small restaurant, and he's like, this is amazing. So he's manufacturing these toothpicks, and suddenly he starts realizing, man, I need more people. The demand for these toothpicks is skyrocketing. So he hires an employee and shoves them in the bedroom. The kids are out on the folding mattress in the other room, which actually happens a lot, believe it or not. And eventually he runs out of ports on that little route. Oh, by the way, Mike needs access to the internet too, right? He's got that little router that's stuck in the drywall that brings internet access to his whole house. So his switch eventually runs out of ports. So it's at that point that Mike goes, let's build something like this. Actually, absolutely not. He doesn't even think about it. He's like, oh, out of ports on my switch, so I'm just going to take another switch and plug it into that one, and add my new employees in bedroom 2 and 3. It's getting a little awkward. He goes into his closet and starts doing work from there, like Network Chuck. And eventually, Mike realizes, it's time to go. We got to get out of the house. And so Mike moves into his first office space. Router stuck in a roofing tile this time, providing that internet access to the entire business. So, are we there yet? Has Mike deployed this? Not at all. He just took the network that was in his house and moved it into the office space. He still has those 2 switches that are plugged together. Oh, but, moving into the office space, he had to hire a few more people handling a little toothpick marketing and all that kind of stuff. So it's starting to expand a little bit like this, and all of a sudden something happens. This cable goes bad, or somebody trips over the power supply of a switch. Maybe it's that one. Maybe this switch, which he picked up from Best Buy for $50, totally fries and goes bad, and it takes the whole network down. And suddenly Mike has that revelation of paying hourly or salaried employees that suddenly are not providing any value anymore. Not only does he have the cost of their salary, but he also has the opportunity costs, the sales that are missed, the marketing that never happened, the deliveries that were behind. All of that happens, and Mike said, okay, it's time to bring in somebody who really knows what they're doing. So they call you. And because you've seen this video, you walk in and you go, this is not the right way to build a network. This is, but you don't show that to Mike. Instead, you realize Mike has a budget, so you start off with one switch right here. And you say, Mike, this is your core switch. And Mike says, well, what does that mean? And you say, the only things that plug into this switch is the critical stuff. I'm talking stuff like your router, because your router has to go to that switch. Stuff like the server that you set up to manage all the printers that you have in your office. Stuff like those printers, because people are using those printers all the time. The really critical stuff. And Mike goes, well, the printer really isn't that critical. And you go, okay, well, then let's not plug it into the core switch. Instead, let's plug it in to your two access switches. Thankfully, we met with a fashion designer to ensure they matched the wall color. And Mike goes, well, what plugs into the access switches? And you say, Mike, what doesn't plug into the access switches? How about some wireless access points plugging in there? How about some desktop computers that your receptionists are using? How about those printers that you said were kind of critical, but then you changed your mind and said they weren't really critical? How about everything that needs to plug in plugs into those access switches? Because that's where stuff accesses the network. And then you explain to Mike, see, Mike, back when you had things daisy chained together, not only will you eventually reach a scalability limit of switches and cause something known as a spanning tree loop that would take your network down anyway, but you introduce single points of failure all over the place. Because if any one of those cables go down, you literally sever your network to where all of those devices are now offline. Whereas with this, if you lose that switch, then you only lose those people. Or if you lose that switch, you only lose those people. It's still bad, but it doesn't take down your whole business. But Mike's a pretty smart guy. And he's looking at your diagram and he's like, well, what about that one called the core switch? What if that goes down? And you get an aura of silence about you and you go, Mike, that's why we called it the core switch. You don't want to lose the core switch. And he goes, no, I don't. But what if it happens? And you go, Mike, let me tell you a prodigy of the wise. 2 is 1, 1 is none. And Mike goes, what does that mean? Obviously frustrated that you're speaking in riddles to him. And you say, Mike, for only $59.99, $99.99 more, we can set you up with not 1, but 2 core switches. And you know what? I would connect those core switches together with 2 cables. And you know what? I'd have them plugged into 2 different power strips. And you know what? I'd have those access layer switches connected to the core switches redundantly as well. And that server's got everything, right? Why not, instead of having 1 network card plugging in, have 2 network cards plugging in? And while we're at it, let's for $89.99, $99.99, we could add a second router in your roof and a second internet connection. And you see where I'm going with this, right? Right? Now you understand a collapsed core network, along with how to sell it. It's now that this model makes sense. And I know many of you are very intuitive and you're like, Jeremy, something's not lining up. What's that? I kept it there just so you could see it and you could know what's coming. As a matter of fact, I actually originally had this cropped off when I was starting this video. I was like, no, I'm not going to hide it. I'm just going to say that's the next level. But for now, let's just talk about the 2-tier network. You'll also understand why they called it a collapse core. Notice which layer I crossed out. It's the core layer. We're collapsing that into the distribution layer because it's not as large of a company as one that would need a core layer. Now, don't hear me wrong. A collapse core can scale to thousands of employees. It's not so much the employees that drive how big that model goes. It's how many buildings do you have with employees inside of them. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the 3-tier architecture. But does this all make sense? I mean, I almost feel like, hey, we don't even have to talk about it that much because Mike explained it all, or I should say we explained it to Mike. The access layer of this model is switches. And notice the big thing, because everybody who's new, it's like the Matrix, everybody falls the first time they jump. Neo, right? Everybody daisy chains switches when they first build networks, and then they realize something bad happens, and that's when they start searching for models like this. And the answer is never daisy chain. Set up a distribution layer. And when you get into more advanced stuff, this is where you consolidate all of that network traffic. This is where your VLANs end. This is where routing happens. This is where access control lists take place, and quality of service, and all kinds of other stuff that we haven't even talked about yet. So don't worry, we're going to get there. Right now, I'm just talking about the architecture and how we build stuff the right way. Now you might be wondering, so if I only have 1 distribution switch, if I couldn't make the sale to Mike, does that mean I'm not following a model? Oh, absolutely not. You are following a model. You just all recognize, eyes wide open, that the distribution layer is a single point of failure. If you lose that 1 switch, everything goes with it. So don't you think it would be smart to make sure that switch was a really good one? Last thing I want to do is just open your eyes to the kinds of switches there are. Just going to go to Google and type in modular switch, because there are what are known as, that didn't work out, not light switches. Let's do modular network switch. That's better. There are some switches known as stackable switches. That's these guys. They're just single units. They're technically considered 1U, as in one unit in a rack. And normally those switches are really good single points of failure. But look at that guy. Oh, it just looks mean. Dual power supplies. You can actually put something known as dual supervisor engines. That's kind of like the mind of the switch, the processor, the memory, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got all your switches right here. Man, if you're only going to have one distribution switch, sure be better to look at that one. And it's all up to Mike. How valuable is your toothpick production, Mike? You now understand the right way to build a network using a two-tier, also known as collapsed core architecture. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.